on here is a more typical problem that you guys will be working with. So for just today, this was one time we really broke it down for you. First you do this, then you do this. But in the future, it's just going to be asked. It's just going to be asked of you to solve a problem, and it's not going to tell you to find the x-intercepts, then find the x-symmetry, and then plug it back in. So, but now you have the groundwork for what you're going to be doing. So once you come across something like this, you just know, well, the first thing I should do is, when we're talking about fireworks, figure out where it's taken off from and where it would be landing. So we have negative 16t, right, equals 0. And you probably figured this out, that the 0 in this case is the ground. It's 0 feet up, 0 feet high in the from, so 0 means where is this on the ground? Well, it's on the ground 2 times, where it takes off, right, which is simply at 0, which makes sense. That's where it's taking off from. And then also where it's landing. Solve this, get t equals 8. So we know where it takes off, where it lands, and based upon what we did yesterday, we know this follows a parabola trajectory here. So therefore, the highest it will get will be right in the middle at 4. That'll be the highest it gets. And you can always take those two also and take the average of them, and that'll give you the same thing, right? 8 divided by 2, which is 4, which is the middle. You can get it from the graph faster, but you can get it. When we start doing this and I'll have decimals and fractions, not quite as easy. So you'll want to actually add them and divide by 2. Okay, but we don't know. We know it's going to be in the middle here. We don't know how high it goes, so that's when you plug 4 back into there. What would be that? 4 minus 8. Plug it back in there and see what you get. So you get negative 64 times negative 4. Now, of course, our answer should be positive, right? This is going, you can't go negative feet in the air, so you would want to make sure that, all right, you do get a positive number. 2 negatives make a positive. 64 times 4 is 256. So that means this gets a total height of 256, right above 250 right here. And it should be opening down, of course, so we know that much. Now, you can see that we really don't have anything to guide us from here to 0 to our vertex at the top. So if you wanted to, you could always plug in like another point, just like we did for 4. Find out it's at 256. We could plug in 2. Right, as well. You could do negative 16 times 2 and 2 minus 8, which would be negative 32 times negative 6. Okay. That equal positive, let's see, 180 plus 12 would be 192. So at 192, and that could help you graph this a little more accurately. So here's 200. So it should also go through here. And remember from the first day, if we get a point on this side, we don't need to go through and plug in, well, let's see what g of 6 is. We already know it's going to be the same here. This is the height when it was going up, but then when it came back down, it was at that same height. So you get the actual same exact answer, right? Not by calculating it, but by just looking at the graph and seeing the symmetry. And if you have a few more points, it might be a little bit easier to graph your parabola. So of course, parabola should go like this. And try to make it symmetrical on the other side. Like that. There we go. So as long as you're not sitting in here, this is we call the danger zone. Yeah, so this is the danger zone right here. Okay. You do not want to be in this area, but anywhere over here would be safe. As long as the firework flames aren't coming down on your head and roasting you, you're okay. All right, so let's take a look at where we're going today. Here. Okay, so you kind of did this probably when you were just doing the cards a second ago, that you could actually not just look at the equation and get the graph, but can you look at the graph and get the equation as well? So by looking at this graph, can you figure out what are the two binomials here? Okay. So here we have, this is like the setup for all of them, remember? And this one goes through -1, and this goes through 3. So what would the two binomials be? Be 1 and -3. Now how come they're different signs? Okay, so remember, you have to solve the binomial and get this as an answer. So if we want to get an answer of -1, right, we actually have to put x plus 1 inside the parentheses. So if we solve it, we'd get -1. Same thing here. If we want to get an answer of +3, right, we actually have to put x minus 3 in the parentheses because you would add 3 to both sides, and then you have an answer of x equals +3. So when you're doing the working backwards, you can see the signs are a little different. Okay, we can put this in standard form, and here's where we're going to start tying in what we did before. We can multiply this together, in other words. So x squared minus 3x, right, and plus x and minus 3. And remember the middle combines. So we have x squared, and that would be, what, minus 2x and minus 3. Okay, and that's standard form because we have the x squared first, and then the x term second, and then we have the number last. Now, we call these special, say the c value right here. Well, the number in front of the x squared is the a value, so in this case a equals 1. The number that's in front of the x is actually the b value, so the b here is -2. And on this particular problem, the last number, okay, -3, that's the c value. Now, don't go by what order they're in, go by what they're a coefficient of. So wherever the x squared is, that's always the a value. Wherever the x is, that's always the b. The number by itself is always the c. In other words, if I gave it to you like this, -2x plus x squared minus 3, -2 is still the b value because it's in front of an x. It's not like, okay, now -2 is first, so now that becomes a. It has to do with where it's what's associated with, not if it comes first, second, or third. So in this case, a is still equal to 1 because the x squared still has a coefficient of 1. Okay, so sometimes we see people, they'll change it because they write the x first and they'll say this is an a value or something, but that's not the case. All right, and all of these ask the question, what do you notice about the c value? And I've already kind of touched on this. Where is -3 on this graph? Okay. On the y value, though. Okay. Where is -3 on the y-axis on this particular graph? Okay, so here's the y-axis right here. Go down to -3, and it's the y-intercept. So the only little bit of information that we're going to get out of today is that the c value is the same as the y-intercept. Okay, so now you know yet another point to get on the graph. You know how to find the x-intercepts, you know how to find the axis symmetry, the vertex, and now you know how to find the y-intercept as well. Now the y-intercept required you to multiply the binomial together, so you can kind of see why did we spend a week last week practicing multiplying these things out. It's going to tie into how we can graph this and get more information so we can graph parabolas. Okay. Starting tomorrow, we're going to start reversing everything. Okay. So what if I give you this, x squared minus 2x minus 3? Can you unmultiply it or go backwards and undo it and write it as x plus 1 and x minus 3 so you can get the two x-intercepts. Okay? That's what's going to start tomorrow. Is basically everything we've done so far, let's do it in reverse. If you're given it in standard form, how can we write it? And you can kind of figure out, like, well, if I have a -2 and a -3, oh yeah, these two numbers add up to -2, and they multiply to -3, so it's not as hard as you might think. It's pretty straightforward. It'll get a little more complicated for some of the problems, but it's pretty straightforward otherwise. All right, so let's try another. Looking at this, okay, what are the two x-intercepts? Okay. It's kind of hard to read them, so that's -4, and that's +4. Okay. And you already know what you should get for the y-intercept. That's -16. So that means down here, after we finish doing the standard form, the last term should be -16. And that's the c value. It's the same as the y-intercept. So we already know by looking at the graph that it should, whatever equation we get, it should end with -16. All right, so write this in. All right, we got x and x. And technically, it wouldn't matter what order we did it in here because one's negative, one's positive already. But technically, if you want to get an answer of -4, we'd have to put a +4. Right? If we want to get an answer of +4, we got to put a -4 in there. Okay? Then you can multiply them together. You get x squared minus 4x plus 4x. And there's the -16. The 4 times -4 is the -16. So what eventually you'll start doing is, if you have the two x-intercepts, you actually also have the y-intercept. You know? Okay. And then here, those just cancel out. 4 minus 4 is 0, so we end up with x squared minus 16. So in this particular case, since there's no x term on the inside, the a would equal 1, the b would equal 0, and the c would be -16. Since there is no, these x's end up equaling 0, 4 minus 4 is 0, so b equals 0, as opposed to, well, the first number is 1, the second number is -16, so b equals -16. So you can see how it has to do with what type of number it is, not if it shows up first, second, or third. And the answer, of course, for all these, all of them ask you what he knows about the c value, and you're just putting together that the c value is the y-intercept. So c is the y-intercept. That's the answer for every single one of these. It's on every single question, but just making sure you don't forget what's different about what we're doing today. We're multiplying it out and looking at these a, b's, and c's and seeing what the answer is, what the c value actually means on the graph. Let's see here. So for each of them, please do this part as well. Please put in what is a, what is b, and what is c for each of them. It's just good practice. We're going to be using these numbers an awful lot. So today I'm also showing you, well, c is the y-intercept. And then we've already kind of looked at what does a mean. Okay, but then the next thing is, well, what does b mean? What does it mean to have a b of 0, and over here we had a b of -2? What does that got to do with the graph? So we'll start looking at a few more things, but almost there. All right, so let's look at one that's facing down. What does it change when it's facing down? Okay. So we have factor form. Let's do it one more time. Got the x's. All right. And if it's facing down, add a negative in front of the parentheses. You saw that on the cards, right? So if it opens down, you put a negative in the front. So every time you see a negative front and you're trying to match with the graph, you always match the negatives with the ones opening down. So we can reverse that as well. If you see it opening down, just put a negative in the front. And same thing, look at the two x-intercepts, which they are -4 and 2. So the -4 will be a +4 here, and the +2 will be a -2. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can distribute the negative in, and then do the multiplication of the two binomials, or you could just multiply the two binomials and do the negative last. So you can do x squared minus 2x, right, plus 4x, and minus 8, right, which ends up being x squared plus 2x minus 8. Right, but because there's a negative on the outside there, right, we have this negative that's sitting on the outside, we just have to distribute that in. So our actual standard form will be negative x squared minus 2x, right, distribute the negative, and positive 8. Right? And once again, we already know we're going to get positive 8 here because it says right there. That's y-intercept should be matching there. Okay. And on here, the a would equal negative 1, the b is negative 2, and the c value is positive 8. And what you'll notice is that the a value kind of mentions it up here. Okay, the a value is either going to be 1 or negative 1 for all these. We'll get into other numbers eventually, but starting off with just basics. So if you have a positive number, that opens up. And if you have a negative number, it opens down. So now you can tell just by looking at the equation in standard form only, oh, it's a positive number, it's going to be opening up. Or if you get the equation down here, oh, it's negative x squared, it opens down. And it has a y-intercept of 8, just by looking at this format. So you can see standard form is nice because we get a y-intercept, and we know which direction it's facing before even graphing it. But the factor form is nice because we have the two x-intercepts, and we can figure out the axis symmetry and the vertex. So we really need to know both to do all this completely. So that's what we're going to be practicing. If you're given the factored form, get the two x-intercepts, the vertex and everything, but then also multiply it together to figure out does it open up or down, and what's the y-intercept. And then, of course, tomorrow, we're going to start off by giving you this format, and you have to figure out how to go backwards to figure out the factored format so you can get the two x-intercepts. Okay. Lastly, you can see here there's only one x-intercept. So they call that a double root. So if you ever have only one x-intercept, you actually do it twice. So if this is positive 2, we're actually going to put negative 2 and minus 2, both of them. So that way, if you multiply it out, you still get a parabola, an x squared. And that's positive 4. So we get x squared minus 4x plus 4 for our standard form here. And once again, you can see the c value is 4, just like it is up here. It's 4. Matches. A equals 1, b equals negative 4, and c equals positive 4. C is the y-intercept. Same thing for every one of these. So giving you a lot of directions for what we're going to be doing in the future. A few things for right now, like what happens if you only have one root or one x-intercept, we call them, roots as well. You actually write it twice. And we could write it another way, which would be x squared, x minus 2 squared, which is the same as this, right? So a couple ways of doing that. Just remember, x minus 2 squared does not equal, notice how this does not equal x squared plus 4, right? It equals this, x squared minus 4x plus 4. So you cannot just do, oh, I'm going to square that and get this. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. And there's my standard form. It does not work that way. Okay, do not do that. Okay, you do have to write it out. Do have to multiply it to get the right standard form. Okay, and that's your homework. So you just need to finish up the back. It's very similar, very much the same. And yeah.